Hi, I'm Sarah Miller. I'm giving the Nahar talk today, and you're joining us a few slides in, but we'll be talking about HMS and our 5 years leading up to it and our Science Collaborative grant. The Tidally United Summits have always been in partnership with the launch of Heritage Monitoring Scout, and our annual report for Heritage Monitoring Scout happens during that conference. If you haven't been to any of them, most of them are recorded and you can view them. The first one was in St. Augustine. The most recent one was online, and I heard from Sarah Ayers-Rigsby. She is looking to host next in Miami and working with some of her partners down there. So that may even be in person, and more on that as we know more from Sarah, who I think is not able to attend today because they have Archeo Boot Camp happening. But in essence, the HMS Florida was all about public engagement and site stewardship and monitoring. We had a good question this week about what are the main work areas for stewardship. I'm like, well, you've got to have archaeological sites, you have to have volunteers, and you have to have that monitoring, that repeating piece. So the grant went to help us bolster up the database that, again, just was a Google Doc for a long time. And it was a way of providing training to people who were interested in learning and doing more about heritage at risk in Florida. So since 2016, there have been 2,651 assessment forms submitted, which is more than we had before. So this is fantastic. So we might be edging closer to 3,000 as we hit the end of the fiscal year this year, but a good number and great to get eyes on these sites. I always say, why are bathrooms more monitored than our most precious heritage sites? So the more we can get out and take a look and see how they're doing, what they may need, the better. We've had 826 Scouts sign up since 2016, so broad participation across many parts of Florida. And then this 2-year time of the special category grant, and the deliverables become really important because you think, oh, wouldn't it be great to have money to continue to support this? But a lot of grants, they don't work that way. You need to have very specific deliverables, and they also start to change the organic nature of your project because you have another whole layer you have to fit in. So for the grant, we had deliverables of assessing a minimum of 500 sites, scanning a minimum of 12 sites with our Faro 3D terrestrial scanner, also using photogrammetry to complement, and drones even, and providing Florida Master Site File updates, and then submitting a report, a final report. So the obstacles were many. COVID-19 was difficult for everyone in the world, and for us, had significant staff and volunteer impacts. Times we couldn't even leave our houses, as you know, and the parks were not available, or staff was not available for us to go and monitor. So that was, look at our grant, 2019 to 2021. Yeah, right on those dates. Storms, some of the flooding that occurred, and this would be months, ages after, there was still flooding that would make getting to a lot of these sites very dangerous. And then I asked Emily Jane, maybe we'll pull up at the end, trucks getting stuck, snakes, ticks, wild boars, the potpourri of obstacles. But we succeeded in meeting the criteria of 500 sites assessed. We submitted 697 forms, meaning some of those sites were monitored twice, and we actually monitored 580 to have a nice buffer in case they wanted to not accept some of those 500 that we submitted. We had a lot of scouts sign up during that 2-year project. Again, difficult with the volunteers. We did have 293 that specifically signed up during the 2-year project, but 26 land managers got involved and 27 staff, which was significant because many times we couldn't go out except with ourselves to try and get some of these sites monitored. The follow-up paperwork was pretty tremendous. We did 94 Florida Master Site File updates. So sites either found in the wrong place, or the boundaries did not match what we observed in the field, or significant portions were missing that we knew to be a cultural component of those sites. We had to submit we had never done permits before the special category grant, but because it was state funding, it triggered the need to do permits. So we didn't do one or two, we did 19 state permits and one federal permit, which is pretty significant for this one, who makes a habit of not pulling permits, of doing work, but got through those and our permits are closed out. These are the land managing units that we partnered with, and really again, excited that we got through these, and these are part of the permits that went through also, because you had to have the land manager sign off on those permits to get them through. So the final report, this is a cover snapshot of this, and you can see many of the contributions from the different regions of FPAN and also our grant staff, Patty Myers and Cassie Kemp, that the project would not have been possible without the full-time funding of their positions. I had this slide that was like, yay, October 22nd, and you probably saw me at SEAC looking pretty happy, but today we're still waiting for the closeout on our grant, so party continues, and I'm a very tired party girl waiting for that to wrap up. But some of the good things that came out of that project that maybe I hadn't envisioned when I first thought, ooh, let's get some more funding for HMS. We had to submit instructions for monitoring, and it gave us what we hadn't really had before, really good pictures, examples, things we could show scouts of every type of things to expect in the field, maybe things to note, and visuals to help in our training, and also for those scouts that receive the training, what kind of artifacts, the real ones we see on the ground rather than ones that were guessed at or hypothetical that they may encounter. So that became really fleshed out and is a great resource that I think is underused, and we're hoping to, it was done in a specific way to meet the state's criteria, but we want to fun it up a bit. So we're going to, now that we are clear of that grant, go into making some more public-friendly instructions that the volunteers can use. Shoreline mapping was another big component of our project, and we learned from Tom and Joe and Ellie over in Scotland about using a Arrow 100. Marcy, we were out there with Alistair Rennie running around with his arrow on his cap, and we're like, we want to do that. So here we are. Emma's got the hat on with the antenna, and we have upgraded since to an Arrow Gold that gives us sub-centimeter accuracy. So it's pretty great for going around and mapping the shorelines. This is the great walkabout. We've done this now 3 times, and I don't even think we're quite done with this 3rd year. But to map the shoreline and try and track erosion in this way, and give us some baseline data. And with the Arrow 100, it was pretty good. With the Arrow Gold, it's really fantastic. It's really treacherous to try and walk around this entire, I'll show you some pictures later, but it does give us a good baseline. And as Lindsay Cochran is working on the modeling of the marshes, it's really interesting to see things we didn't really think about until we saw her model, and we're like, oh, that's why this, or just even more aware of the differences in height happening around that dynamic shoreline. This is what it looks like on the west side of the peninsula on the river side, so pretty good bluff line there. And an okay way to get volunteers active, but again, it is more dangerous than, it's more difficult than just like walking the shoreline, because some parts we were last like on our hands and knees trying to get through some of the roots and the vegetation. But these are our baseline areas. It's really great when we can visually see the cause of some of these offsets. This section we felt pretty good about because we could see the fallen trees. We could see where there were recent land deposits that had fallen off. So we have to add to this our 2022 line. And again, that was with the Arrow Gold. So getting some really tight on our measure of error. The 3D terrestrial scanning was another part of the 2-year project. And this is Jeffrey Robinson, who's using the data for his thesis over at University of West Florida, and Nicole Granan outreach coordinator over there, helping Jeffrey out in the field. If we have time, we'll pull up, we have 13 models that were done of sites around Florida that were on the approved list, and some of them are just really amazing. The Bulow print is one of my favorites because it's such a large thing, and I don't know if we would have gotten this kind of a model done if it had not been for a pandemic, because this is one of the few areas staff could go and safely distance and have the park to ourselves because of COVID, and got a lot of data. It was really therapeutic also to be out there. And Phil Rand, the land manager, is just one of the most delightful people to work with. It was always great to see him. So some of the data that came out of that 2 years is looking at what are the cultural resources we were looking at. Majority were archaeological sites. A good fraction are cemeteries because we can send scouts directly to them without having a breach of site location information given. Structures, we do have that in our database to allow for assessing structures. We were not allowed through our permits to do underwater resources, which is different than before the grant where we had been able to. So we are missing the underwater component of what we know to be also endangered in Florida. This is again the reason for all those permits. 367 of the sites assessed were on state land, but many on private, federal, county, city. So got a good round of different land owned types. This is another graphic we'll get back to. Sites verified. So for the most part, we could find the site, we could verify the location, site in a different location. So these got site updates to update the location, but sites could not be found, and the why no sites. There's this funny email thread back and forth about why no sites. So we get down and digest some of that in a little bit. Our good, fair, poor, high, medium, low charting. And this is a good point to have prioritization talks. You know, we probably don't need to focus too much on the stable, low, good, stable, low sites compared to, you know, high priority but low declining. So this is not a way to make a definitive list, but a good heuristic device to have conversations about what are the next steps and how to make sure we're doing what we want to do when we're taking the next steps beyond monitoring. The threats observed, active vegetation, active erosion was the number one, and the most common were attributable to impacts from the climate crisis. So this is the kind of things that the scouts were able to report, and now we have really good example of many of these to share with others. And that's just that same data in another way. The visible artifacts were kind of interesting because we're showing what we're showing to the scouts as examples of artifacts they may encounter didn't really match up with the artifacts they in fact encounter. So that's something that we of course corrected a little bit on to make sure they can identify the most frequently encountered artifacts, and then helping coach them into diagnostics and how to take good pictures. We really like this slide because it shows the kind of ratio of FPAN to land manager to volunteer. This is a little off normal because of the pandemic and because of the permitting situation, but it does tend to be a near even ratio of ones visited by FPAN staff, land managers, and scouts. And is it a little artificial to keep FPAN staff in there? It's not. If we don't feel like we're part of it, there's a chance we may not contribute to it. So we're a big part of contributions and making sure people know that these programs, it's not just the volunteers. They need a lot of support from other archaeologists, other professionals, and those running the programs. So assessment trips, these are how the numbers panned out for the sites that were assessed. This is the wino sites when we further broke it down, and by we I mean Emily Jane Murray, who went back to a lot of the sites and tried to say, okay, if we couldn't find it, why couldn't we find it? And I was really interested, we've done this whole project looking for sites lost due to climate crisis. What did we actually lose? And the things to point out, site loss due to shoreline changes, 25%, and then area disturbed developed. So our shoreline changes are outpacing the development. However, remember, these had to be permitted, so it's not without some restrictions on which sites are entered into the case study numbers. But to demonstrate site loss, and we wanted to say, how do we know these sites are lost? We get this question a lot. Well, you can see the sites. The red is mapping the shoreline with our arrow, and then these are sites that could not be found because of shoreline erosion. So a pretty good chance that these things are not there anymore and can say we're lost due to shoreline erosion. We also had a big support for the HMS database during this time, and Cassie Kemp remains on as our database manager, and we got to put a lot of updates and bells and whistles, and I would say we're one of the leaders of ARCH's use, and we're part of a group now worldwide of different ARCH's users that gets together to share information. And we just have our ARCH's for such a different specific use. I think the other programmers find it really delightful, but it leads to good conversations. We had an email thread from a person working in South Georgia to track cemeteries in the Antarctic area, and it was fascinating. And she wants to use ARCH's to give her project more oomph, more of a scientific appearance. So it's a very different use of ARCH's, but we're glad we can contribute to those conversations. And be looking, the Getty Institute is featuring us in their magazine in April, so we'll put that out. But they're really interested, especially in African American cemeteries and our use of ARCH's to monitor those sites. And if I haven't said it enough, I love Solocator. I've been using it. We use it for our sites and encourage our scouts to use this. This will help label your photos as they come in with date, where you are, and the coordinates. You do have to be mindful, because if you're sharing those photos, then you're accidentally sharing site location information. But we even used them at a collections visit this week, because trying to quickly take photos and remember the provenience and what I was taking a photo of, I think it's just a great tool to help. And then the partnerships were probably our favorite part, just getting out there with different land managers we maybe hadn't worked with before, but St. John's Water Management District, local governments, FWC, all these groups to sustain relationships that existed before, but find new ones. And I think we have a really good argument to make that land managers love using this program to monitor their sites. They're participating with it, but we have ones that were outside of the grant that weren't allowed because of things that didn't count on the grant, were things that were not permitted or not directly assessed by FPAN. So we are actually really excited that, guess what, we also had 30 land managers that were monitoring that didn't count towards that grant, but shows that they are invested and think it's a really good use for how to track sites. So just to end on some positive notes and the sites that we got to see, I'm going to move ahead a little bit. Seeing our volunteers, yay! So Emily Jane Murray and I in this area near Talbot Island that is just like in a time capsule, completely wrecked shoreline site. Getting out to Anastasia State Park with the St. Augustine Archaeology Association and Flagler College students and Professor Lori Lee. It was really great, and here we are after many of us were getting our booster shots and more safe to get out there, but really nice. And this area is closer to our house. We were at the Guantanamo Matanzas National Estuarine Research Reserve as part of the first grant that I'm talking about today, but is the focus of our second grant, and always a good time to be out at the NER, and they are excellent research partners. Fish Island is right across the water here, and again, getting out with St. Augustine Archaeology Association to do some monitoring, and also City of St. Augustine. This was a big grassroots movement to save this site, and it is now purchased by the state, managed by the city, and is now a preserve that people can visit, and hopefully an area of future research. And I couldn't find truck got stuck photo, so I put in another, like, ooh, this is a hard that's in the water still at Tomoka, but Emily Jane can put in the chat some corrections if I'm wrong there. But it was a pretty cool site I had never seen before, and right at that threshold of land and sea. Which brings us to our next grant. And I have a lot to say, maybe in the questions section, on grant culture, but moving to this NERS Science Collaborative grant, it's like a culture shock, and it's delightful in many ways. For one, here's our title, From the Past to the Present, Ecosystem Services and People of the Guana Peninsula, which has been shortened to People of Guana. So nice, we can have a public-friendly title that helps get the gist out and takes down some of the jargon in between. People involved with the grant, Emily Jane Murray and Emma Dietrich and Robbie Boggs in our office, so anything I'm saying, I mean to say we and the collective we. Part of the research team, Leah Sansom, she's the land manager at the GTM NER, Lindsay Cochran, who's been doing the modeling data, and Meg, who is our mitigation expert extraordinaire, we hope to see down here this summer. Dr. Lori Lee, who's the technical lead on the project, and will be doing some field schools and some mitigation out there. Cassie is still our database manager, and we've been able to work with Ben Marwick on developing a survey for the stakeholders and end users, and that will help us get at prioritization and further discussions of what the public would like to see researched and preserved, or as part of the subject of our grant. The NERS grant is based entirely on this collaborative science mindset. And what a beautiful way to frame this collaborative work we all do, and what we really need to be doing as those involved in climate heritage work. The respect, inclusivity, humility, and patience. I mean, to go from one kind of framework of how you do grants, how you look at the research and data, to this collaborative science mindset is just so fostering, and I think really acknowledges all the different groups and individuals we're trying to bring into this discussion, and the sensitivity and the ability for things to change, because we're dealing with a very dynamic issue that needs to move to where the work is as it happens. So this has been a really good fit for us, and if you have a NER in your area, I highly encourage you to look into these partnership grants, because they're the real deal as far as following this and beginning their meetings with this and drilling this through and through. Some other resources that the NERS grant provides is a project webpage. They also have a lot of templates we can use. They have a collaboration, do I have it in here? Collaborative contract. I'm not saying quite the right word, but a template that you can get these things down on paper of how you're going to collaborate. And it's just such again, a different grant culture for us to be working with. They have one department that can help develop logos for the project, and also are helping us with an artifact card to improve. That's one of the #1 questions we get asked by the land managers and the public, like what to do when they encounter artifacts. So this grant has helped us, take a look at that and help come up with some solutions to the issues that are arising as we're doing our work out there. We are using the Nahar model. This is the Nahar pipeline, and was front and center in our grant application. Do the modeling, which Lindsay is getting to some preliminary results, do the monitoring, which we have started to do and have our one permit in play to do some of that recording and with the public. Meeting, we're getting to that step, scheduling a community conversation, and that methodizing and mitigating piece this year is going to be happening so fast, again, to get the permits for the excavations this summer, but we'll have more to report on that. And I asked if we could go outside of the NERs. A lot of the Gullah Geechee communities we hope to engage live outside of the NER or have never been to the NER, and their response was, you go to where you need to go, which was really lovely. And we also have budgeted trips down to the Seminole Tribe, TIPO's office, to have consultation and ongoing conversations with them. So we're excited to see this thing that we were putting a lot of ideas and hopes and wishes into, funded as an example of what the Nahar structure can provide. We got into the field, was it just last week? Hasn't this been an eternity? It's 2022. We had a delightful time in the field last week and getting out and doing the walkabout. We've been having public meetings, hybrid public meetings, and this is our one last week before we went out to the field, and Lindsay is presenting her preliminary modeling data, and we meet once a month. This is just a quick glimpse of some of the modeling, but the areas that we're going to take a closer look at for future products. So coming soon. At the end of last week, this is where we left the site, and different areas of the NER are eroding for many different reasons at different rates. And as we were out here, all I could think of is it's like these trees are on a conveyor belt. They're just going and dumping off and then setting sail like an island set to just float around. And it's just insane to be in and amongst it and see how much is, getting chunked off at a time. So important to keep doing that work, but it's also, as I said, it's a little dangerous, and we need to be thoughtful of the data that we're going after and to make sure it's worth the risk of getting out there. And I mean, the snakes I'm not actually worried about as much as the roots that get me and bring me down, but we'll continue to talk with others in Nahar and see best practices for measuring the changes of those shorelines. 2 days ago, Emily, Jane, and I went as part of this project to look at the collections that have been held in Tallahassee from the site. And it was interesting because we really only ever see surface finds that are eroding out. We barely ever get to see anything in situ, and certainly not much collected with some controls as an archaeologist would do. We found, why did I even think I could say it right? Schist. I did it. Some schist, that's a luminescent stone that had been worked, that was part of the site. Marbles. Emily Jane was just awestruck because we found a lot of marbles, and that's something we've never seen in the eroding finds, and indicates another group use at these sites we hadn't been considering. And lots of majalicas for me to play with and get excited about. These kind of ancient looking artifact file sheet forms. They're not that old, but it kind of shows how projects like these give an opportunity to also update. And we were helping with some rebagging of the collections, and getting back to those is important because they're a form of legacy collections, and we need to remember that that is also there as a resource that we need to bring in and make the public aware of where things have gone. So we're not yet to the methodizing or mitigating, but we will continue to talk further about that later. We're always hoping to get the Arches Collector app up and running. There's some coding reason why ours is not talking. I think when we started our database, they were maybe getting onto Arches 3 and 4 and 5. I think it's up to Arches 6. If Cassie's here, she can correct me in the chat. But Arches continues to update, and we're excited because this is a perfect for our project that we could go out and use the Arches app directly on our phones as we're out there. We continue to support the HMS database statewide, not just for this project, but for all the land managers, volunteers, users. So that's important to keep up. We also keep up training. I think we've now had 9 virtual trainings, and we're hoping to get back to in-person trainings very soon. If you want to know more, our project webpage, I have a link I'm going to put that has a graphic and some of the links. And site stewardship, I've been interested in site stewardship programs because I think we meant to have a public engagement program looking at heritage at risk, and it kind of came backwards by design that we were really building a site stewardship program. And to tap in with others in the country or internationally that are doing site stewardship programs is just, it's just like talking to all of you. There is so rich for how you learn and exchange information, how you can come up with defenses when you need to, and different groups may have a criticism, and these folks have faced it in the past. And I say, see me after class, because I have a site stewardship survey. If you are a manager of a site stewardship program, we have a long survey. If you can even fill out the first page so we know you're there, it's just really important as we work to hopefully SAA in 2023, a very robust site stewardship program. And it can be at any level, those who are veterans and sustaining or just developing a site stewardship program. We want to continue to network with you, and thank you to Chris and Beth, who may be on the call, who have the annual conference for the National Partnership for Site Stewardship. So see me after class if you're interested in taking that survey for the site stewardship programs. Also, because we're compiling this data, we reached out to the National Park Service and Teresa Moyer, because the technical brief on site stewardship programs is greatly out of date. So within a week, Teresa Moyer is like, yeah, let's do it, and already has the posting for that position. So it's maybe $17 an hour with a housing stipend, and can be done remotely for 8 to 10 weeks of work. You get to work with folks like me, so you can apply for that internship, and I'll try and include the link. I'm nearly at the end. I'm going to give you a link that has this graphic, and I posted it on social media. I think we're good at getting grants and working on the grants, but we all must do really great at sharing the results of these projects, and as broadly as possible. We were able to pull this infographic together from the final report and put it in the hands of legislators at the advocacy day for Florida Archaeology Month. And I had a meeting with our Flagler College president yesterday. I brought this over to him, and just trying to share the information in ways the public can digest. It is a use of public funds. And also, if you're thrown to the mat in, let's say, a online newspaper, and people are questioning use of funds, having this at the ready to be able to share and demonstrate, this is what we learned, this is the activities we did with that money. It's a lot of work, so we need to share that with people. Some other resources, if you don't have them already, I can send you our paper with Tom Dawson, Coastal Heritage, Global Climate Change, Public Engagement, and Citizen Science. And that's, I've already forgotten what it was in. It was in something pretty good. And Alice was part of this paper as well. Well, it's not a PLOS One article. It's I'll get to it. And then Emily Jane Murray and I have the HMS paper that has the building blocks of the what Heritage Monitoring Scouts is. I'm happy to send that to anyone as well.